Hello and welcome back to F1 Every Week. I am your host Ben Wevel, and today I will be reviewing and analysing round 9 of the 2022 Formula 1 World Championship, the Canadian Grand Prix. This race has been on the calendar since 1967, with the first victory in a World Championship race in Canada going to Jack Brabham at Mosport Park, which would alternate races with Quebec's Mont-Tremblant until making the move to Montreal in 1979. Canadian native and infamous F1 driver Gilles Villeneuve, six-time race winner and father of the 1997 world champion Jacques, as well as accomplished snowmobiler, would be the first to win at the Ile Notre Dame circuit. And when he sadly perished at the 1982 Belgian Grand Prix on the final lap, the circuit was renamed in his honour. This year the 40th anniversary of the Canadian's death. Michael Schumacher and Lewis Hamilton are the most decorated drivers in Canada, with 7 wins to their names. The closest driver to either of them still only having less than half of the victories of these two giants, as Nelson Piquet had picked up 3 Canadian Grand Prix victories in his career. Last time we were here was in 2019, and who could forget the drama of Sebastian Vettel, who being given a 5-second time penalty for unsafely re-entering the track, placing the first place banner in front of his own car after the race out of disgust at the race director's decision, which gave Lewis Hamilton the victory. You can listen to the podcast on a variety of streaming platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, all of which are linked below. Now, without further ado, let's get into episode 62. First off, in terms of news coming into the weekend, was a new measure by the FIA introduced prior to the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in order to combat the porpoising issue, which gave Mercedes driver Lewis Hamilton severe back pains. Videos were circling of the British driver being unable to even get out of his own car. This is such a point of controversy for the teams, as those who have effectively come up with a solution to the phenomenon, such as McLaren and Red Bull, will feel that other teams will gain an advantage over them if the FIA works to eradicate porpoising, Christian Horner being especially vocal about this. Despite this new proposal by the FIA, the Mercedes was looking as bouncy as ever in FP2, Lewis Hamilton describing the car as undrivable and only managing P13 in second practice, at a track in which he has dominated over the years. Another rumour floating around the paddock was to do with Oscar Piastri. The young Kiwi has had an astounding junior career so far, having won the Formula Renault Junior Cup, F3 and F2 back to back to back. It was such an injustice when he was denied a Formula 1 seat for this year, but there are some serious conversations going on about his position on the grid next year, with Williams having even been cited as bringing in Oscar in favour of Nicholas Latifi for as early as the British Grand Prix, but this cannot yet be confirmed. However, if he is not on the grid in 2023, there will be some very unhappy fans almost everywhere you look, unless you're a follower of Latifi. Alpine had a barnstorming start to the weekend, with Alonso 3rd in FP1, 5th in FP2, and Fernando and Esteban with the fastest time and 4th place respectively in the wet FP3. Fernando may have only scored 16 or so points this season, but his form has been off the charts. Remember in Australia, when he was when he looked to be going for the front row, but he succumbed to hydraulics issues and crashed at turn 4. If Alpine can snatch a podium at Canada, they may be in a very serious battle with McLaren for 4th come the end of the season. Sebastian Vettel also showed his strength in the damp FP3, going 3rd fastest in the Aston Martin, possibly setting himself up for some necessary points on Sunday. Keep listening to find out if he does so. Finally, the pre-qualifying sessions were completely different for two of the main championship contenders this season. Whilst Max Verstappen went fastest in FP1 and FP2, Charles Leclerc faced turbo issues in his second practice, and having already taken a 10-place grid penalty after his dramatic retirement in Baku, proceeded to take a new power unit as well, sending him to the very back of the grid, alongside Yuki Tsunoda, who also took penalties in the AlphaTauri. This championship challenge is crumbling for Ferrari and Leclerc, and they really need to turn things around or Red Bull will have an easy victory. But we're nearly halfway through the season already, and the real question is it too late for them? Now on to damp qualifying, and Q1 saw some big shocks, as both Pierre Gasly and Sebastian Vettel, who had been P2 and P3 respectively in FP3, were both knocked out before they can make it to Q2. Not only that, but both Canadian drivers were also knocked out in Q1, disappointing the home crowd. However, Lance Stroll has managed to score points multiple times from 17th on the grid, so maybe he could repeat that feat again. Finally, Yuki Tsunoda also did not bother to put in a competitive time, as he would take a grid penalty anyway. Now on to Q2, and some went for the intermediate tyre, with two of these brave souls, Albon and Perez, finding the wall, the latter of which doing so at turn 3, leading to the first red flag of the day. Out in Q2 were Bottas, Albon, Norris, who faced some misfiring issues, Perez, who crashed out, and Leclerc, who would take a grid penalty. Q3 was action-packed, as the track was just about on intermediate levels of wetness, but it was also not quite dry enough for slicks, which George Russell found out on the exit of turn 2, running straight off and damaging the rear wing on his Mercedes, but being able to continue and making 8th place. The times tumbled at the end of the session, but it was Max Verstappen who would take pole for the Canadian Grand Prix. The worst result possible for Ferrari and Charles Leclerc, but a jubilant one for Red Bull. Fernando Alonso was also in a celebratory mood after qualifying, as he was on the front row for the first time since his pole position at the 2012 German Grand Prix, nearly 10 years ago. Carlos Sainz was in P3, with Lewis Hamilton achieving his best qualifying on the season in 4th. The two Haas drivers followed, as they took one of the team's best qualifying finishes ever, with Ocon in 7th, and Russell, who was unable to make the most of the jumbled-up qualifying thanks to his clunk at the barriers, was just behind. Daniel Ricciardo was P9, and Zhou Guanyu rounded out the top 10, this being his first ever Q3 finish. Now for my driver of qualifying, and it is undoubtedly Fernando Alonso. The Spaniard has shown flashes of brilliance since his return to the sport last year, with a well-earned podium at last year's Qatar Grand Prix. But this P2 on the grid in the wet, his first front row start in nearly a decade, epitomises why he still deserves a place in the sport and shows us what Formula One will be missing without him. Next for my team of qualifying, and Haas took this one in my books. Haas have had a turbulent start to the year, having scored points in the first few rounds, but then falling back from the midfield very swiftly, on account of mistakes made, mostly by Mick Schumacher, and reliability issues from the Ferrari engine, which have plagued them as of late. However, this third row lockout will be a huge confidence booster for the American team, and should hopefully result in some much needed points on Sunday. Finally, my struggle of qualifying is Sebastian Vettel. The German set some blistering lap times in the wet in FP3, managing to pip Esteban Ocon to 3rd. However, this qualifying session was completely off that pace, as neither Aston Martin made it through Q1, and Seb was audibly shocked at the lack of speed. Let's hope that he can turn it around on Sunday. So, it was Max Verstappen who won the Canadian Grand Prix, his first ever victory in the country and Red Bull's 6th in a row. However, Max's teammate Perez would retire on lap 8 with a gearbox issue, bringing out the virtual safety car, under which Verstappen and Hamilton pitted. There was a tough tussle for the lead in the closing stages of the Grand Prix between the Spaniard of Sainz and Verstappen, but the victory would just about elude the Ferrari driver for the 5th time. The first of these second-place finishes having been his battle with Pierre Gasly at the 2020 Italian Grand Prix. Carlos managed to easily move past countryman Alonso in the early stages, doing the same again on lap 23 after having pitted under the virtual safety car, caused by the retirement of Mick Schumacher from the points on lap 20. Verstappen went on to two-stop the race on lap 44, but Sainz played the strategy to perfection and pitted under the safety car caused by Yuki Tsunoda crashing into the barriers on the pit exit, and meaning that Sainz would be on the back of Hamilton at the restart with 7 or so laps fresher hard compound tyres. However, the Dutchman did just about enough to hold off Carlos to the flag. Lewis Hamilton took 3rd place, his 2nd podium of the year and Mercedes' 5th podium of the season, which will be a massive confidence boost for both Lewis Hamilton, who was citing that the car was undrivable at the start of the weekend, and Mercedes as well, who, despite all their porpoising issues, have only on one occasion, with one driver, not scored points this season. This incident being Lewis at Imola. George was just behind in 4th, still having finished in the top 5 in every race this season. Hamilton made contact with Magnussen in the opening stages, which led to the Dane having to be given a black and orange flag for the repair of his front wing. But Hamilton pitted initially on about lap 15, despite Russell trying to go for the one-stop, pitting on the Schumacher VSC. However, this strategy did not quite work out for Russell, as the Brit was forced to pit again on lap 46, under the safety car. Lewis Hamilton was looking very racy after Tsunoda's safety car restart, but he was not taking any risks and cruised home to 3rd. Charles Leclerc's performance was excellent on Sunday with P5, which still means that he is nearly 50 points off Max Verstappen in the championship, and the Ferrari are over 75 back in the constructors. Leclerc had to work hard for the P5, being caught in a DRS train early on and succumbing to a slow stop on lap 43, dropping him to 11th. However, the Monegasque made some crafty overtakes on the likes of Bottas and the Alpines, and was really brought back into contention for the podium by the safety car. This is definitely a positive step for Charles, but he now has a monumental mountain to surmount if he must mar Max's monstrous margin. Esteban Ocon took 6th, 1 up on his qualifying performance, which moved him within 5 points of Valtteri Bottas in the Drivers' Championship, who finished 8th. His teammate Alonso followed, and the team got the strategy completely wrong. They missed their opportunity to pit under the VSCs, Fernando pitting on lap 28 and planning to go to the end on the hards, but he was forced to come in on lap 48 once more, under the full safety car, and could not challenge at the front as he is surely envisioned today. This is yet another example of a great weekend for Fernando, which didn't result in a whole lot of points, so he needs to improve his consistency if he wants to challenge for the higher places in the championship. The 2 Alfa Romeos followed, Zhou Guan Yu taking his 2nd points finish of the season, 20 points, the team 20 points ahead of AlphaTauri in the championship, who came away from Canada with 0 points, Tsunoda having retired and Gasly ending up in P14, and Lance Stroll completed the top 10 at his home Grand Prix, tying him on 3 points in the championship with Albon. With Ricciardo following in 11th place, Vettel's pace evaporated as quickly as the rain did in time for Sunday's race, with only 12th by virtue of the retirements, in stark contrast to the highs of last weekend's top 6. And Albon was P13. Norris, Latifi, and the unfortunate Magnussen were the last of the finishers. Now for my driver of